A lot of those spoiler alerts I've been giving you relate to this chapter, going into verbal communication and how verbal communication is utilized and how it impacts us, both within our sphere of influence, our self-esteem, and into many aspects of our relationships. What we want to talk about is invitational rhetoric, characteristics of verbal communication, some group communication, barriers to communication, and manipulative communication. Where I'm going to start is Foss and Griffith's invitational rhetoric. Now, this is a form of communication that I've been kind of telling you a little bit about, some spoiler alerts earlier about. The reason why is because it's a different type of communication that we're normally not engaging in, and that we actually should be engaging in to truly improve our relationships. Foss and Griffith give us five different communications that we utilize, and we tend to utilize the first two a lot more than the others. Those first two fall into what we call confrontational rhetoric. Now, rhetoric actually has kind of that devil term that we've talked about before in it, but rhetoric traditionally just means persuasion, discussion, all of that. So don't get scared by rhetoric here. The first form that we encounter is conquest rhetoric. Conquest rhetoric is a type of rhetoric that we see very, very frequently in our day-to-day interactions, which is, I'm right, you're wrong, period. It's a conquest. I'm going to beat you down and make you see things my way. And that is not a very helpful form of communication. It's hard to build a good relationship off of two people in conflict. Conversion, it's a little bit better. It's, you're wrong, I'm right, but come here, let me show you how you can be right too. In other words, they're trying to convert you over to their way of thinking. In both of these, they're creating a winner and a loser. And with a winner and a loser, there can be humiliation, there can be pain, there can be guilt, anger. All these come up when we engage in these confrontational rhetoric styles. However, this is what we predominantly see in our society and in our relationships. It's a battle between the husband and the wife. It's a battle between families. And yet, that makes it hard for us to communicate. We get a little bit better. We get into benevolent. Benevolent is more of you have concern for the person. And so when you're actually trying to communicate with them, what you're trying to do is steer them into a safe harbor. You're trying to give them support, but at the same time, you're still in a little bit of that confrontational because you're still saying that you are correct and you're concerned and you love them, and this is how they can become correct. So you see a little confrontational in there with conquest and a tiny bit of the conversion being thrown in as well. Advisory, that's kind of what dictates school, for instance. That might be your mentor at work. It could be this class where you have someone that you've come to and said, teach me what you know about this. And that's advisory rhetoric, where one person's advising the other. It might also be the financial advisor you go to. It might be the cooking show you watch. All those things can kind of fall into the advisory rhetoric. Now, invitational rhetoric, on the other hand, is really a sharing of worlds. And this is how we truly get to know a person, get in contact with them. When instead of trying to beat them or one-up them or top them, we're like, no, share with me your world and I'll share with you mine. And it almost goes back to when we're talking about different cultures, where you have to be going into a conversation realizing your views might be changed. And you have to be vulnerable when you're in invitational rhetoric because you're expressing how you truly feel. You're not with a mask. You're taking the face aside and you're giving a little bit more of your true self. We run into the characteristics of language impacting, if we can do that, how successful we are. Language is symbolic, and the symbols are not universal. They can change depending on your culture, your experiences. You know, even when we're talking about those vague terms like love and patriotism and success, they can mean different things to everyone. So it can be more difficult to share your world when you're not sharing symbols that are similar. And so even you might have to step back and say, okay, let's talk about the symbols. Let's see, when I say love, this is what I'm talking about is an expression of caring. It's being there. It's, you know, meanwhile, the other person might have a different interpretation. So you start to understand the characteristics of language and the symbolism within language. You can then begin to connect better with people. We've talked about this a little bit and kind of introduced it in other aspects or other chapters. But the semantic triangle is a triangle where basically a word may not share the same meaning between two people. That goes back to when we were talking about the bank in the last chapter, or if we were to say, hey, a dog sounds good. Well, if you're like me and you're a dog lover that loves puppies and all those, then you're thinking the little four-legged kind. Meanwhile, the other person might actually be a baseball fan and they're thinking about being at a baseball game and they want a hot dog. That creates a barrier when we don't share the same meaning of a symbol. So you always must understand that sometimes you may use a symbol or a word, and if it doesn't seem to be connecting, then you need to modify that word until you get to the point where, oh, okay, now we're sharing the same symbol and the same referent, and we're making that connection when we're talking. There are rules in language, of course, and when you violate the rules, then it becomes hard to communicate. And the rules can be anything. It's not just APA format. It might be a cultural rule. You know, when you're at a place of worship, you're quiet, or maybe you're loud. It all depends on the type of place you worship. Or if you're at a party versus if you're at a wake. Both of those have a large group of people that are gathered around eating food and possibly listening to some type of music. However, words in one might be appropriate, words in the other might be inappropriate. Like if you just say, you're killing it at a party, hey, it works. On the other hand, if you use that at a wake, that doesn't follow the rules. Language is flexible, or better yet, it's fluid. We have personal idioms. My wife and I have been together for 30 years. I don't know how she deals with it, but she's still here. And now we have communication where I can use a phrase or a word or say something, and she gets it right away because of that connection that's been built up. We've also mentioned at times Borman's symbolic convergence theory. And this is where we're basing our reality based on those shared experiences that create those personal idioms. In other words, if I am able to communicate with my wife, a lot of it does come down to we have shared this experience, and through that sharing, we can then communicate on a different level. Two or more private words towards the other come closely together or even overlap. Can help create group consciousness or cohesiveness. In other words, if we're able to utilize a symbol within a group, that it can bring us closer together, and it may overlap with other words that we might utilize. Like a group that utilizes patriotism, oftentimes we'll use words like freedom because they overlap. Dramatizing a significant type of communication in small groups. In small groups, oftentimes we act out, we use different voices, we display our symbols in a different manner than we do in a large group. This all goes into Borman's theory. And he's ended up calling them group fantasies, which is not necessarily the term that most people think of, but it's a group experience, such as if you have a person that's constantly late, we'll give them a name of Bob. Bob is always late to work, always late everywhere he goes. And so all the people that know Bob refer to pulling a Bob as showing up 5 to 10 minutes late. Boom. Suddenly, those people that know Bob have a group. And they have a group shared off of that. Now, we see this with popular culture as well. Alice in Wonderland, that's a great example, because if I say mad as a hatter, you know what I'm saying. You know, a smile like a Cheshire cat. You're like, oh, yeah, I got that. Down the rabbit hole. All those things all connect because we have shared the experience of reading that book or of watching that movie or at least of hearing that story. And for that reason, we now have a bonding aspect within a group. And that's what finishes off this slide, as I can now see. Of course, it goes even further than that, because experiences can be broken up into cultural and regional experiences. For instance, growing up, did you have a soda, a pop, or a Coke? All those mean the same thing, but depending upon the region that you're from, it may have a totally different meaning. If you say, hey, I want a pop, to someone who's down south, they don't know what you're asking for. You say, I want a Coke. Oh, yeah, here. It could be any brand, but that's how they've attached it. Same with soda. You say crick or creek. And of course, if you're down south and they say, bless your heart, don't take that necessarily as a blessing. It's kind of a way of saying you don't understand. So we do see this, where there is a shared experience, a shared meaning that connects groups. And this oftentimes comes out in our verbal communication and the words we choose to use. Colorado is kind of unique because we have had people from all over come here. And because of that, we might say crick or creek. We might have a soda or a pop. Ask for any of them, you'll get the same thing. That's because we become more blended. And as we become more blended, some of those regional cultural aspects that influences words and the symbols change. It evolves. This is one of the crazy things about the English language. The reason why it can be so complex and so hard to learn for people is because we've taken any word that we like from another language and thrown it in our language. If you look at this is kind of a breakdown showing the English tree and how it is influenced by Slavic, Romanian, German, European. It has all these different aspects of it that when you start realizing it, you start understanding, yeah, Tex-Mex food isn't Mexican food, it's Tex-Mex, it's Americanized, you know, and we'll take words that we like and we throw them in our language, and so our language actually is very complex based on the fact we're drawing from so many other languages. Functions of verbal communication. It shares a meaning. It gives a name to something. You know, if I say dog and we go back to that, I'm not talking about a hot dog, I'm talking about the little four-legged kind. To you, that could even have a different meaning. So I might have to say Chihuahua, German Shepherd. I might have to say Pit Bull. Any of those things gives a name to it and a further description to help with our communication. Because if I say my dog got out and I'm talking about a toy poodle, you're like, oh, wow, I hope you caught it before I get ran over by a car or something. Meanwhile, if I say my Great Dane got out, you're like, I hope it didn't eat the neighbor's cat or tear up a tree and carry it around the yard, something of that variety. So naming is an important aspect. It can also be about performing actions. And this is cybernetics. Now I know cybernetics sounds like it's something from Terminator or a sci-fi movie. when we're talking about cybernetics within communication, what it is it began as a study of use of radio and telephone as we were moving into that technology base. And if I was to send you a message through the telephone or through the radio, and it got you to do what I needed you to do, that was successful. On the other hand, it could be unsuccessful. And basically, we change our communication based on the response you get. If I tell you, hey, go start the car, and instead you turn on the ceiling fan, I know we're not communicating, so I have to change my message. And this is primarily Anthony Weiner and Lang are the two main people that really talk about this. So it's directive, it's making a competent move to create meaning, it's expressive, and it's a declaration. Now within groups, it helps the language we use, also helps create our identity, how we conform to it, and how we regulate it. Going back to the restaurant example, in the kitchen, they might have a certain lingo going on in there that you don't understand when you're the part of the wait staff, and vice versa. Or the bartender versus someone that doesn't work in the bar. They have many terms that you just go, I have no idea what the guy just said. But it's a case of within the group, it has an identity, it helps people conform to the group, and it helps regulate. Additionally, it helps create conversations. It's interactive. It may have local management, speaking order. In other words, when you're out there and the hostess is speaking, you know to listen to them rather than listen to another wait staff. Or if the CEO of the company walks in and she tells you to do something, well, she gets the speaking order because she's the CEO. It can also be universal. In other words, that might have a shared meaning in and out of the group. And it might also be scripted for a group. If I'm going to talk to this group, I need to use this lingo type of thing. It helps with managing relationships, reinforcing roles, the speaking order, who's coming up with the terms, the power distribution, all that can be found within the group communication based on the words that are being used. Cooperative communication. Understandable messages. We need to have messages that are understandable. They need to be informative. They need to be honest. They need to be relevant. They need to be clear. They need to be dealing with an understanding. This is also part of our ethics. Because if we can apply this in our workplace or in our groups, then it actually improves our ethics. When we violate one of these, it becomes unethical. If we go into a group and we're not being honest, that's not ethical. If we're being purposely unclear, again, unethical. Using I language, a method of responsibility. When you're in a confrontation and you're using I language, what you're doing is you're taking responsibility. Rather than saying, you did this and you make me mad and that doesn't work. However, on the other hand, if you say, I feel upset when this happens, you're taking responsibility for that feeling and for that communication. We, on the other hand, can of course be used to help unify groups. When you're talking about, hey, we need to go win this game. Well, automatically the whole team gets involved versus I need to go win this game, which doesn't work so well in sports. Barriers to verbal communication. Verbal aggression, deception, defensive communication, and sometimes communication can be a barrier to communication. There's manipulative types. One of the ones that is prominent is goalpost moving. In other words, they make you think you can achieve something. They make you feel that, yes, I can be part of the group if I do this. And then once after you do that, they move the goalposts. And it can include name calling, smear campaigns, devaluation, oh yeah, sure, you accomplished that, but it wasn't that impressive. You took too much time, and it can be harmful. Another form is if people are using aggressive jokes. That can also be hurtful and can lead to manipulative communication types. Triangulation. Now this we saw early in our lives when we were little kids. When you have 3 kids in a room, 2 kids will gang up on one, it always seems like. And it's sad because what happens is that in order to have the power within the conversation or within the relationship, people will look for allies to work against the third person. And that is very harmful to relationships because usually triangulation doesn't stop with a triangle. It becomes this really bizarre mix of triangles where this person talks to that person and then talks to this person, and before you know it, it really becomes horrible. Narcissists love this method because it makes them feel like they're the peak of the triangle and that everyone's listening to them. And that's where they're not really communicating, and they don't like when the other people communicate together. Gaslighting. Boy, this is something, this actually comes from a 1940s movie, I believe, that was called Gaslighting. And in the movie, the bad guy demonstrates the different aspects that we have come to know within gaslighting. A gaslighter can tell blatant lies. Usually the bigger the lie, the better, because they're more likely to be believed. You know, instead of saying, oh, I was late because of the traffic light, which is very plausible and very believable, they'll come up with something along the lines of, oh, I was late because I was kidnapped by a UFO. Now, why that might be hard to believe, when you try to disprove it, then you're kind of running into getting lost from the actual message. So they tell blatant lies. They deny something even though you have proof. You can sit there and record the person that's gaslighting you, and they'll say they never said it. Even when you show them, well, yeah, I said it, but you misinterpreted, tongue in cheek type of thing, you know, where instead they'll deny that that was actually what they said, even when you have proof. And they want to get near and dear. When they want to gaslight you, they find something that's important to you and they attack it and devalue it. And in so doing, they can use it as ammunition. They might use kids, you know, what will your kids think about you if you do this? What will, you know, and they use that as ammunition against you. They wear you down. They are tiring people. When someone's gaslighting, you get tired. You get tired of pointing out that they're wrong. You get tired of engaging in their lies. And so you just become worn down. Their actions don't match their words. They might say they're the most honest person, but you catch them lying 5 times a day, which isn't how an honest person acts. So you run into that. And they'll throw in positive reinforcements just to keep you on the hook, to keep it going. So they might be cutting you down, but say, I only joke about you because I love you. But people, that goes back, their actions don't match their words. They're wearing you down. So you can see that gaslighting, when you hear about it, yeah, that's what you see with gaslighters. And this is a very ineffective form of trying to communicate. It breaks completely away from invitational rhetoric because you cannot take their perspective because you never know what it truly is. They also know that if they can confuse you, it weakens you. They project. In other words, if they feel insecure about themselves, they'll spend most of their time saying you are insecure. And they're projecting what they feel. If they're saying you're an angry person, they're normally saying this while they're screaming and while they're physically being aggressive or, you know, intimidating. And they try to line people against you. It goes back to the triangulation, where they try to get people to line up against you. All these are definitely bad aspects of verbal communication, where if people are verbally communicating with you in this manner, they're gaslighting you. So we started out with invitational rhetoric. Invitational rhetoric, I'd love to talk more about it because I really enjoy the topic and I really think it's something that we have to learn and we have to practice to become good at it. That we can't just say, oh, I'm going to do invitational rhetoric when we're so used to that confrontational type of rhetoric. So that's something we need to learn. Characteristics of verbal communication, group communication, we went into a little bit with Borman's symbolic convergence theory. We talked about some of the barriers of communication from eavesdropping all the way to interrupting. And we also talked about manipulative communication from the goalpost moving to gaslighting. I hope you enjoyed this. I know these are running long, but I got 3 to throw in this week. So I'm going to go ahead and hit them one after another.